So, Willie, thank you very much for making time to
It's my pleasure, Nick.
to share your insights into the future. But before we go into the future, can you tell us a little bit more about your own backgrounds? Where did you grow up?
Yes, Nick, I grew up in a small town in the northern Free State, Sasolburg. It was my father worked for Sasol his whole career, and it's an interesting part of the country, right? So it's seemingly very polluted, which is true, right? But if you drive down Sasolburg, it's got the most beautiful oak trees that you can imagine, and it was planted many years ago by the founders of the town. So I grew up there and moved to Pretoria and Johannesburg, when I was still relatively young, and I've been here ever since.
And really, what was your dream career when you grew up?
You know what? I've always wanted to be an engineer. My dad was an engineer, and I always looked up to him. So from a very young age, I enjoyed mathematics and science, so that helped certainly, going for engineering. So that's exactly what I did. I studied engineering, so I followed in the footsteps of my father.
And what attracted you to ICT?
Look, in my early career, this is an interesting question, Nick. In my early career, I was very fortunate to work in the defense industry, which may sound funny, but in the late 80s, early 90s, maybe not for the right reasons, but a lot of money and capital investment went into the defense industry. And for a young engineer, there was wonderful opportunities to, incidentally, I met my wife there as well in the defense industry.
Okay.
To work on fascinating projects in artillery and avionics in the naval systems, and that's exactly where I worked in my first few years. But I think with the change in the political situation in South Africa, I realized that I needed to do something different. So I then moved from core electronic engineering, software and hardware, and then slowly my career evolved into IT.
Right.
So I've been in IT sort of pretty much 25 years, and in business as well as in hard IT roles. But I think my engineering foundation has always been precious, and I think it's always been extremely helpful.
Now, really looking back at your early days, who inspired you?
Look, I mentioned my father early on. He unfortunately passed away many years ago, but he was very influential in my thinking, not only around my professional career, but also around life, as you can imagine. And I always looked up to him, to say that, he's a role model. It's somebody that I would like to model my career on. My career turned out similarly in some respects, but very different in other respects. But even today, I still find myself referencing the conversations that I had with him, especially when I was at university and my early career, when he was still around. I think we had many good conversations, and I certainly learned a lot from him. As I say, that I can still tap into the wisdom today, which is fantastic.
And really looking back over your career, would you say there was a major turning point where things could have gone different, but you decided to take your career this way?
Absolutely. I can think of two turning points. I think the first one was I joined after my early stint at Altec, where I worked in the defense industry. I joined ABSA in the sort of middle 90s.
Right.
And I was afforded an opportunity to head up a business within ABSA as the managing director. I was 32 years old.
Right.
And I remember I got called in by the then chairman to say that I actually want you to take this business, and it's making losses at this stage, and I want you to turn this business around. And that was the conversation. Right. And I remember walking away from that meeting thinking, how will I actually approach this, and where will I start? And so I think that was an amazing inflection point for me, getting that opportunity, young age, tough assignment. How do I tackle this? And eventually I did turn that company around successfully, and I learned a lot from that. The second one was much later. In fact, it was a few years ago. I was afforded by Standard Bank an opportunity to study at MIT. I was there for 6 weeks, the Advanced Management Program. And it was a small class, 23 people, no engineers,
right?
People from different walks of life, different industries. And in that 6 weeks, I learned so much about myself, about the world, other nations, thinking,
Yeah.
new mental models. And so at a personal level, but also at a professional level, it was one of the reasons why I ended up at Vodacom, from Standard Bank, was just that deep personal reflection and that inflection point I went through
Right.
at MIT was really powerful. So those are the two examples that come to mind.
Now, Willie, today you're the Group CIO of Vodacom. Can you maybe give us a little glimpse into the future? Where's Vodacom taking us in terms of technology?
Yes. Look, I've been with Vodacom now for 2 years, and it's been incidentally, I had a really, really good career at Standard Bank. I was there for 13 years, and they really helped me and invested in me, and so certainly I owe a lot to them. It's been a fascinating 2 years with Vodacom. Obviously, at its core, it's a technology company, right?
Right.
What is amazing about Vodacom is the winning culture. There's a strong drive in this organization to be number one, and it's fantastic to feel. You experience it every day. And of course, there are lots of challenges being thrown at the telcos, as you can imagine. Data pricing is a big thing, but also new technology. We spoke about 5G earlier. That's the next phase for us, and everything that comes with that. On all accounts, it's extremely powerful technology, right? I think our dilemma in South Africa is that we're still sitting with even 2G. So we have 2G, 3G, 4G, 5G. In Europe, as an example, there's a strong drive to now decommission 3G. Never mind 2G, that's already gone, right? So we find the challenge to actually deploy technology in an environment where spectrum is obviously a very scarce resource. Very encouraging to see that the government has now made strong moves to open that up. And there's a whole process that will unfold around that. Because for us to really offer this technology to our customers, you need to make sure that we do it in an optimal way, that it's in a commercially a sensible way as well, and for that you need access to spectrum. I think that the biggest challenge for telcos is the shift from being a provider of telecommunications infrastructure to, and if it's fixed or mobile, that doesn't really matter, to really be a relevant player into the future as a technology communications company. And I think that's a big shift that we are going through as Vodafone, but also as Vodacom. And what do I mean? I mean that, of course, we will be a supplier of 5G communication technology, enabling mobile communications, data, fixed. But we're also increasingly getting into some of the value-added services that we carry on those networks, right? So you're talking about financial services, you're talking about video, you're talking about gaming, you're talking about music. So that's a big focus area for us in the future. And as IT and as the CIO, it's a very exciting time to actually manage and oversee and be part of the leadership team to manage through this big inflection and this transition. To still continue to be, the number one in the market around our core offering around mobile and fixed, but increasingly to start playing in a very different world where there are a lot of competitors and where the big guys are playing it away. The Facebooks of the world and the Googles,
Sure.
and the Twitters and whatever the case might be. And that's putting a lot of pressure, positive pressure, I think, on the IT team to be able to do the legacy well, but enable the future.
Okay.
Building video platforms, building financial platforms, building payments platforms.
Right.
So I think that we are moving, if you want, in South Africa, certainly into the space of financial services, and potentially the banks are moving into telcos. If you think about some of the work that the FNB has done previously, what Standard Bank is doing as well. So there's a lot of convergence happening as well.
So would you say the level field has become the playing field has become a lot more level?
I think so, and it's also exciting. Take a company like Rain as an example. They're a fairly new player. We partner with them, but they're also a competitor, in another sense. So there's a lot of competition that's happening from that point of view. Similarly with banks, we partner with banks on many things, but we also compete on others. And I think that's the future. The amazing thing is that these days, especially with cloud technologies, a relatively small startup can actually come up with propositions that's very powerful, very compelling for consumers, and make it really uncomfortable for incumbents. I mean,
Right.
let's look at what's happening with, with the like of Bank Zero as an example. It's cloud-based, it's all in the app, there's no physical engagement or channels with customers. And on all accounts, they are busy building a core banking platform for much, much less than one would see in some of the legacy banks.
Right.
And I think they're going to be pretty competitive. So I think you're right. I think the playing field is certainly very exciting, and it's offering even small players an opportunity to really, really come forward with compelling offers.
So Willie, on a personal level, what is driving you today?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. I think if you'd asked me that question 20 or 25 years ago, I've always been, healthy, ambitious in terms of what I wanted to achieve. I think the older you get, the more wiser. I mean, it sounds a little bit staid, but I think it's true. I really think the older you get, you realize that that there are other more important things than just climbing the corporate ladder.
Right.
And being the next MD or CEO or CIO. So for me, I think it's less about titles. For me, it's you start thinking about your legacy. You start thinking about, so what if you're not there? What will people say about you? Did you make a difference? Did you change people's lives? And I think the last few years I've really tried very hard to take opportunities where I can make a difference, that I can apply some of the things I've learned over the last few years positively, but more importantly at a personal level. See people around me, in my team, in my broader teams, really excel, grow, learn new things. That's what excites me, is that, sowing the seeds that hopefully benefit other people, not only yourself. I mean, I think that's what drives me.
Willie, that takes us into leadership.
Yes.
So the big question is really, what does the future of leadership mean to you?
Yeah, I think a very good question. I think in my experience, leadership has changed a lot. I mean, I grew up as I mentioned earlier, in the 90s, and going into very hierarchical organizations. I mean, think about a bank in the 80s or the 90s in South Africa. Strictly hierarchical, very formal, very structured. Everybody should know their place. Everybody, I remember if you go up, typically the executive floor is the highest floor in the building.
Right.
And if you go there, you have to put on your tie. You have to put on your jacket. And I think what I'm seeing with leadership, that it's changing dramatically, and it's less hierarchical. So I honestly believe and subscribe to the notion that servant leadership is a powerful construct that I think increasingly driving organizations.
Right.
I don't mean soft leadership. I don't mean leadership where everybody makes decisions. I still think you need some hierarchy in the organization, but I think how leaders show up is certainly changing. And incidentally, I've done a lot of work in the agile space, and agile for me is not so much around how you deliver software. It's really how you engage people. How do you motivate, energize people? And I think one of the powerful constructs of agile is really about autonomous teams. So I think, as leaders, we really grapple, how do you get these autonomous teams set up? How do you encourage people, even junior people, to make decisions?
Right.
Do not wait for the hierarchy to engage, to bring the decision, because ultimately the people closest to the work, they are really best positioned to make decisions around that work, right? But traditional organizations is not allowed that. So no, you take this wisdom and then you push it up in the organization, and allow the layers to then, with their little filtered information, to make a decision, and then you push it down again. So I really think that organizations of the future will look very different. I think the hierarchy will take very different forms. I think layers will disappear in a lot of instances. I think decision making will happen a lot closer to the working future. And clearly technology is also changing that, and it's also helping and facilitating. In the old days it was also about, who's got the information.
Right.
And these days information can flow up freely in the organization, horizontally and vertically. So I think, my biggest challenge is to actually facilitate this transition of of an organization or organizations traditionally being very hierarchical, top-down, and one that sort of potentially inverses the pyramid.
Right.
So instead of the wisdom and the decision-making sitting at the top, if you invert it, you're actually saying, well, hold on a second. Indeed, at the lower levels in the organization, there are wisdom, they're very clever people, and maybe we should give them space to make some of the decisions, right? And see what happens, and maybe be surprised even from that point of view.
So Willie, what have you learned from your own journey that you consider most important for building future leaders?
You know what, maybe it's a personal DNA thing, but for me, what I found most powerful in my career was bosses and leaders that gave me really challenging assignments. I mean, I mentioned earlier on, and I don't think Alvin Berger would mind if I call out his name. You know, he was the group CIO at ABSA for many years and then moved to Standard Bank. And, you know, he was the guy that gave me that break that say, okay, you're 32 years old, go and run that company. So I think one of the things that really helped me in my career is where the challenge was the biggest, I think the learning was highest. Okay. So when young people talk to me, or if you know, people ask me for my opinion and they early in their career, I think that's the one piece of advice I would give them, is to say, you know what, maximum learning takes place where you are outside of your comfort zone. So push yourself into assignments, into doing things that really stretch your thinking, that makes you to the point where you say, I don't think I'm up to this, and then just go a little bit harder. That's where your impact's going to be highest. That's where your learning is going to be highest. And yes, there may be a risk of failure, but I think that if you really focus on the opportunity of growth and learning, the negative side of that will disappear.
Right.
And the true learnings will come out. So I think in my career, it's really helped for me was to not be complacent, end up in one role. I moved around in my career. Incidentally, I think that executives of the future and leaders need to be exposed to multiple different experiences, different companies, different industries, and typically in assignments that really stretch you. Why? Because that's where learning is at its maximum.
Now, Willie, when you speak to aspiring leaders, what is it you tell them about the new skills they need to master to future-proof their career?
I think we covered some of that through the interview, Nick. I have a strong sense that that things are changing so quickly, and the half-life of your knowledge, as we know, is just shrinking dramatically. So what I learned at university versus what my son is learning now, you know, he's also doing engineering, is in many respects very different. So I think we have to really, really force ourselves to make sure that our knowledge stays current. And I'm a firm believer in reading and learning and putting pressure on yourself, not only to take tough assignments, but to really continue to be a student. And it sounds a little bit, you know, it's sort of basic and simple, but I think at the end of the day, it's very powerful. I mean, when you read about, you know, Bill Gates as an example, you know, and how many books he reads per year, and how that Warren Buffett, you know, again, you know, so I think something as simple as picking up a book and reading it at any given time, I must probably read 5 books, right? And I find it stimulating, I find it challenging, and I find it really gives me new ideas, and it keeps my knowledge current.
Right.
And in these days where your half-life of knowledge is so short, I think you have to really, really push yourself. And it's not only about formal learning. Of course, degrees and master, those things are important. Sure. But I think it's about that informal learning, and it's about that ongoing. And these days, it's so easy, right? I mean, on your iPad, whatever, you can download as many books, more than what you can consume. It's not even that expensive. And so really, I think that is something that I would really advise leaders to do.
So Willie, when it comes to technology, what are the key technologies or maybe tools of technology that you would recommend future leaders should learn and master?
Yeah. Well, look, in South Africa, it's interesting. We spoke about where we are a bit earlier in our introduction, but you know, the fourth industrial revolution is happening, right? It's there. You can touch and feel it. Those two technologies are maturing incredibly fast. I mean, just to digress for a moment, if you look at the cell phones and the foldable cell phones, I don't know if you've seen that being publicized. And it was a bit of a joke 6 months ago when those first phones were released, Samsung, and they had to embarrassingly actually withdraw it. Well, you know, headline news, they're back, right? And a lot of other competitors are busy launching that as well. So a technology seemingly impossible or very difficult to master, you know, in the space of a few months, you've seen a number of suppliers that actually solved that problem. So for me, I mean, there are a few technologies, and I think the way I look at it is you shouldn't see these things separate. I think you should see the power of multiplication.
Right.
So if you look at artificial intelligence times quantum computing times 5G, you know, imagine what you're getting. I mean, just to let me make it practical for a moment. Cloud, you know, quantum computing, we know as a technology is quite difficult, right? But Google has just come out and they've just published some of the results in terms of their quantum computing experiments.
Right.
And what they're seeing there is that some of the artificial machine learning algorithms that they are running through the quantum computing technology that they've built, they're talking about a factor million speed increase, right? So something that they said that would have taken the best technology that was available 10,000 years to actually compute, they can now do in the space of hours and days, right? So just take that, the power of quantum computing, then you times that by, you know, what's happening with artificial intelligence and how quickly that's maturing from a technology point of view. I mean, if you think something as simple as a chatbot, right, and personalization around that and how that technology is changing and what we can see into the future. If you look at Vodacom, how we use algorithms to actually powerful, you know, make recommendation in real time to our customers, and the impact that's made from a business point of view is absolutely massive. And then we spoke about 5G earlier, you know, things like autonomous vehicles, and it feels like that's far away. It's not. The technology is there. I mean, we see these vehicles being rolled off the production lines, you know, every single day. So I think my answer to your question, don't see these technologies in isolation. See them in unison.
Right.
The one times the other times the other. And I think that's where you're then going to see the million turn into a billion, right?
Right.
And the notion of it 10 times, 1,000 times just falls away. And it's there, you know, it's there for us to actually exploit. So on the one hand, you can be a little bit cynical in South Africa to say, you know, are we in a position to really have a sensible conversation around, you know, fourth industrial revolution, or is that far-fetched into the future? My view is it's an and conversation. It's not an or conversation.
Right.
We should have conversations around solving our problems around electricity and education and safety, but at the same time, we should really ready ourselves to be a player in the technologies that I've mentioned. And I think we've got the skills, we've got the capability, we've got the brains to actually have that and conversation and not the or conversation.
And really, when it comes to social media, what is your advice for future leaders? How should they handle and navigate social media to build their own brands?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I've got a presence on LinkedIn, and I think that it's a very powerful platform. What I liked about LinkedIn is, in general, you know, people use it for professional purposes. So I think it's a very credible platform.
Right.
So I think that people should use it, but you know, just be mindful of social media in general. You can spend a lot of time on it as well. It can be wasteful, right? So I think it's important that you think about what is the message that you're trying to convey, and I think be authentic. My personal view is that your virtual profile, or what you're presenting yourself in the social media to be, and what you are in real life should be the same.
Right.
So in terms of your experience, in terms of what you can give, your knowledge, all that, you know, what you share in the you know, in the social media should reflect truthfully who you are. I think if not, you'll be found out very quickly, right?
Right.
So I think that authenticity is really important. You know, don't spend too much time on social media. Think about what are you trying to achieve. What is the message that you're trying to convey? How does it uniquely you?
Right.
You know, and is there something that you want to put out there that somebody will consume and say, that's a new insight, that's a new idea, that's a new concept. I find value in that. And I think if you can do that on an ongoing basis, there are people out there that will benefit from what you're sharing. They will give you feedback, and in that feedback, there's learning taking place from that point of view. So, I think use it with care.
Right.
And with thought.
Now, Willie, as a mentor to future leaders, can you maybe share a success story or two where you mentored somebody and that person took your advice to heart?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I'm the I'm the right person to ask that that question. I think it would be most probably better to ask some of the mentees that I've touched through my career. But I mean, I think fair to say, let me answer it maybe in a more general way. I spoke earlier about opportunity and learning out of the comfort zone. I can think of a few people in my teams over the years that have really stepped up to the challenges and the growth opportunities that I've given them. I think very seldom can I think about, if I think about the last 25 years where I've given somebody an opportunity to say, here's something that's outside of your comfort zone, take it, run with it, that they've disappointed me. And is that not a powerful thing, right? And so in hindsight, maybe I should have done it even more.
Right.
Where I should really say to my team, so here's something, you're not quite ready for it, but hey, just like Arvin did with me so many years ago, tackle it. 8 or 9 times out of 10, people are going to make a success of it from that point of view. So, I don't want to be arrogant about it. I don't want to call out any specific examples. I just want to say that, I've never been disappointed where people close to me that I've mentored, people on my teams where I've given them, stretch opportunities where they've disappointed me.
Right.
In that. So maybe it's a learning for up-and-coming leaders as well. When you don't think somebody's ready for that assignment, think again. They most probably are.
And Willie, are there any role models of leadership that you came across maybe in your career, in your studies, or even books about leadership?
I want to call out 2 examples, one international and one close to home.
Right.
So the one book that I really enjoyed is quite a recent book. It's called Hit Refresh, and that's Satya Nadella. He's the CEO
of course.
Microsoft.
Right.
And I was, to be honest with you, I remember going to Microsoft many years ago when I was still at Absa. Took the trip all the way to Seattle when Bill Gates was still there. And the sort of culture we spoke about, hierarchical organizations and very boastful CEOs and egotistic. And I mean, Bill is he's on all accounts a great CEO, but he was quite self-centered, right?
Sure.
And his successor even more so. And here comes Satya. He was a career Microsoftie, comes through the ranks, deeply respected for his technology acumen and for his leadership, and he gets the job. And I was one of those that said, this is just a step too far. He's not going to be able to shift the culture in Microsoft. And if you read the book, he did on all accounts, and he did it in such a way where he shifted the culture from one that was very competitive, extremely competitive, internally as well as externally, very aggressive, to one that is much more people-centered. And I spoke about servant leader. I think here's a perfect example of somebody that I think exhibits those behaviors, and at the same time got to commercial outcomes. I mean, if you see what he did with the positioning of Microsoft around cloud, if you see what's happening with their market capitalization, they hit the number 1 spot on 1 or 2 occasions the last few years in terms of the largest company in the world. They're a strong competitor at Apple, where a few years ago it was, a lot of people were saying it's the end of Microsoft. So I would think as a role model, when I read the book, I thought, I can really relate to what he's writing. I can relate to his thought patterns, his personal motivations as leader. He wants to really grow other people. He wants to make a difference. And he really wants to bring out the best of the collective that is Microsoft. And he's done it in an extremely powerful way with the right business outcomes. Right. So that's my first example. And by the way, for those of you listening, Hit Refresh, it's not a hard read. Go and read. And also about some of his personal challenges. his one son, his son is, is in a wheelchair. It requires a lot of his personal attention from him and his wife, and he's done it in such a respectful, powerful, inspiring way. So please read that book. A bit closer to home, I want to talk about somebody that I respect. I know him quite well, Mteto Nyati. I think you've interviewed Mteto.
That's right.
I've come across him in my career in IT over a number of years, and he's written a great book, Betting on a Darkie, and I think even it was number one on the sort of top readers list, if you want,
on Amazon,
at exclusive books and even Amazon. So a very inspiring read. So I also want to invite you, very different context to Microsoft, but what Mteto has done, in his career in different industries and different organizations, extremely powerful. He's also for me exemplary leader. For me, also a servant leader. I think if I see what he's done at Altron, a very complex listed organization, very complex challenges, and how he's turned that company around. On all accounts, he's done a sterling job, and he's somebody that I really enjoy interacting with as well at a personal level. So, second book, if you've got time, if you're listening and you want to read something at night. It's a great read, and it tells a story about being a businessman and the difficult circumstances in South Africa, and how that can turn out positively. And clearly, Mteto is a very powerful voice, and somebody that a lot of people look up to, and I'm one of those.
So, Willie, how can our listeners connect with you?
As I said earlier, I'm active on LinkedIn, so certainly you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. Also on Twitter, on occasion, at Willie Stegmann as my handle on Twitter.
Right.
You can send me an email as well if you want, willie.stegmann at vodacom.co.za or at icloud.com.
Right.
And let's connect and let's continue the conversation. And if you've got ideas to share on leadership, I certainly do not profess to know much about the topic. I've been through different experiences, and the one thing I can share is my learnings.
Right.
And I've got many, and so I'm happy to share that with people and as wide, as deep as I can.
And last but not least, Willie, is there one piece of advice for future leaders that you would like to convey, and for them to implement it in their own lives?
I said it earlier, and I can't emphasize it over enough, is really stretch yourself beyond what is comfortable. I've done 10 Ironmans in my career, and when you go through an Ironman sporting event, it's a challenge, right?
Right.
It's a training and the event itself, and I think there I learned how powerful it is and how much more you are capable of than what you're thinking. So my advice really is to don't go for the easy assignments.
Right.
Don't take the broad path, take the narrow one that's full of rocks and stones. Right. It's going to be more challenging, but it's going to take you to a place that's going to inspire you, it's going to make you grow, you're going to impact others, and you're going to look back in your career and you think, wow, that's been worthwhile. I've actually changed not only myself, but people around me as well.
Well, Willie, thank you very much for sharing your insights and your wisdom.
Thank you, Nick.
And helping us to build a better and hopefully faster future.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the opportunity.